Tonight, civilians at war.
They just killed him! Oh, Jesus. Oh, my God.
The unseen and untold story of contractors caught in the middle in Iraq.
I figured we were all going to be killed. And they started, just bombarding us with rocks. You can see there was a trench that was dug on the left side of the road. And I'm thinking, this is going to be bad.
4 years into the war in Iraq, most Americans have become familiar with the numbers. More than 140,000 men and women in uniform serving their country. More than 3,300 dead and at least 26,000 injured. These figures represent the war's public balance sheet. But there is another tally, another ledger, with which most citizens are not familiar. And that set of numbers tells the hidden story of the Americans serving in Iraq as civilian contractors. How many are there? This past December, the Pentagon's Central Command counted officially 100,000 men and women, some providing security and many others performing support services, cooking meals, doing laundry, and driving supply trucks for the military. Just like their counterparts in uniform, these often unarmed civilians serving in Iraq have also found themselves in the crosshairs of the insurgency and sectarian violence.
It is one of the untold stories of the Iraq War. Hundreds of truck convoys crisscrossing the country, delivering much-needed supplies to U.S. troops. Many of the men and women in the cabs are not soldiers, but civilians, unarmed American civilians. They are part of a more than 100,000-strong force of private contractors in Iraq, doing some of the most dangerous jobs in the world. On October 28, 2004, the lead fuel truck in this convoy hit a mine.
Nothing in the road, and we drove by, my driver, everybody else said there was nothing in the road. Mine was planted.
A soldier in the convoy can be heard on the radio as another soldier videotaped the attack.
Mine was planted. No idea how. 3 people hurt, 2 trucks totally destroyed.
The driver of the fuel truck, John Woodson, a civilian from Texas, barely survived the explosion.
I ran over the tank mine. It ignited and it blew me up. It blew me through the top of the ceiling of the truck and out up to 50 to 60 foot away from the vehicle, and I landed out in the desert.
Woodson had been in Iraq for just 4 months, working for Kellogg Brown & Root, or KBR, formerly a division of Halliburton. He lost a leg and most of his eyesight.
All I remember is several soldiers working on me at that point, and they kept telling me to stay with them, don't die, don't go. Prior to going to Iraq, I had 20/20 vision in both eyes, and after these injuries, now I've got 37% vision in the lower part of my right eye, and I cannot see at all in my left eye.
Before the war, Woodson worked as a well-paid construction supervisor in Houston. He signed on to rebuild Iraqi oil refineries in the spring of 2004 when a headhunter for KBR offered him a job.
He wanted me to go over in to work in the petrochemical industry, rebuilding refineries. I guess in the course of a couple months, though, times had changed. And they said there was a hold on that, but would I want to go as far as the trucking division? And so I told him yes, because I wanted to do a part for my country.
After the bomb blast and emergency care in Iraq, Woodson was flown home. No longer able to work, he turned to lawyer Toby Cole, who knew how to get the medical benefits Woodson had been promised.
He felt comfortable telling me about his problems, about his medical issues, about his health, and his care he was getting, and so he asked me to kind of help him out.
Cole spent more than a year battling both KBR and its insurance company and demanding help from government agencies. He won workers' compensation claims, and Attorney Cole made sure Woodson got medical coverage under a federal program. In the process, Cole learned how little anyone knows about the use of private contractors in Iraq.
I think just about any time over the past couple of years, you can find on the internet or on TV how many soldiers have been injured. You can't find how many contractors were injured. You can't find how many were blown up, how many were sent back, disabled. That information isn't out there. And so if you blow up a contractor, it's not that big of a deal because the public really doesn't know about it.
Even though John Woodson was caught in the crossfire of war, he wasn't counted in the Pentagon's official record of the wounded. In truth, there is no official military record of injuries to private contractors. The only government office that tracks contractors is a small agency that administers workers' compensation programs in the Department of Labor. 4 years into this war, the record shows that at least 770 private contractors have been killed in Iraq and almost 8,000 have been injured.
Do you have any idea how many total people are involved?
Well, the latest census seems to say it's about 100,000, almost as many as the uniformed military that we have in Iraq. No one thinks about that.
Representative Jan Schakowsky, a Democrat from Illinois, has been asking for information about the private contractors, their injuries, and their missions for almost a year.
It's never talked about. There are unclear guidelines of what their mission is, who they report to, what their accountability is. And as members of Congress and as the public, don't you think that we ought to know? We may be going to the point where we're going to have a war for hire, and the rest of us, as our patriotic duty, will be told to go shop.
Well, what about the argument that's bound to be put forward by some people, not confined to the Defense Department, that there ought to be secrets about this, that our enemies and potential enemies shouldn't know our full capacity and therefore keep all this off the radar screen?
I think in a democracy, if you have an administration deciding, well, we won't say anything, but we'll just send another 20,000 that we hire or another 10,000 that we hire, then the scope of the war is completely unknown to the American people. And I think that is very dangerous for a democracy.
The Constitution is built with checks and balances to prevent getting into foreign wars without a careful thought and the will of the American people behind it.
Marine Colonel Thomas Hammes, now retired, arrived in Kuwait in 2004 to help train the Iraqi army. Behind the front lines, he found private contractors a welcome addition to American forces.
They maintain the bases, the camps, the facilities, the truck drivers. Much better to have 40-year-old truck drivers who've been pushing trucks for 20 years driving around the Middle East rather than our 18-year-old truck drivers who it's their first time out in this area.
Do you think most Americans know about this business of contracting out part of our war effort?
I think most Americans don't know, and I think one of the reasons they don't is contractors are treated almost like they're not Americans. Everybody support the troops, support the troops. The contractors are going through the same thing, getting shot up, being wounded, but nobody's saying support the contractor, support the contractor.
Well, why did the administration decide to outsource as much as it did to these contractors?
I think it was an effort to save U.S. forces, to convince people that we could go in light, not stay very long, not get bogged down, and turn it over to contracts.
What worried Colonel Hammes was the deployment of contractors, often unarmed, into battle zones.
I get very concerned anytime you cross into an area of actual hostility.
So I was going to ask you to make a list of those areas where you think it's inappropriate to use contractors.
Essentially, anywhere they're armed, any place that the threat is really significant. And of course, that would include for convoy operations in places like we're seeing in Iraq today.
From the first days of the war, those convoys, some stretching for miles down Iraqi highways, were often run by civilians with limited military escorts. When John Woodson started driving in Iraq, he thought the fighting was over.
At that particular time in '04, when I did go, George Bush had said the mission was completed there, and that things had been calmed down, and that the U.S. military would be there protecting the civilian workers, as what I was. So I readily went.
Cindy Morgan went too, signing up to drive trucks in September 2003.
At the time, I was trying to get away from an abusive husband that I kept running, ex-husband that I kept running into.
A single mother of 3 from Tennessee, Morgan was barely making ends meet when she found out she could make $80,000 a year tax-free working as a truck driver for KBR. She did 3 tours over 3 years. once while her oldest son, Kenny, was there serving as an Army specialist.
I went to support the troops, and my son being a soldier, to support him.
You mentally train yourself. If this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. If this happens, do that. So, and you go over it so many times in your head so that when that stuff happens, that adrenaline hits that system like a freaking brick wall.
Late one night, on a trip back from delivering ice to U.S. troops, Morgan turned on her video camera moments after an attempted ambush of her convoy just outside Baghdad.
Nobody's hit, right? It's all right. It's all right. We're okay. We're okay.
I'm just talking to myself.
It's all right. Everybody move to the right. All righty, eyeballs, everybody.
In the war's first year, private contractors were right there with the troops, and casualties and injuries were low. But as the first anniversary of the invasion approached, attacks on both U.S. troops and contractors increased. When 6 contractors were killed driving a supply convoy on the road to Baghdad's airport on April 9, 2004, Americans got a new picture of what was to come. Attacks on convoys continued throughout 2004 and into 2005. Then in September 2005, a KBR convoy drove into an ambush when it took a wrong turn.
I figured we were all going to be killed. And they started talking, just bombarding us with rocks. You could see there was a trench that was dug on the left side of the road. And I'm thinking, this is going to be bad.
Art Faust was unarmed, along with all of his fellow civilian drivers. They could only wait and watch.
God damn!
One of the survivors, Preston Wheeler, videotaped the execution of a driver in a truck ahead of him. In the end, 3 KBR employees were killed.
They just killed him! Oh, Jesus. They just killed him. Oh, my God.
And there was 3 of us that were killed and 3 of us that were critically injured. And we had to sit there for 20 minutes taking on small arms fire, not moving, just sitting there.
Each year across Iraq, contractors continue to do the same dangerous work. At least 60 companies are now employing civilian workers. The biggest is still KBR, with an $18.5 billion contract to provide all the food, lodging, and supplies for U.S. troops and to help rebuild Iraq's infrastructure.
While congressional committees are still demanding answers about the hiring, costs, and deployment of so many civilian contractors, they get few answers. But do the math. If you add the 770 civilian workers known to have died in Iraq to the more than 3,300 U.S. military troops lost, the American death toll in Iraq alone is actually 25% higher than the American public has been told.
When an American soldier is killed overseas, it's reported on all the media networks. All the major newspapers carry a daily count. Most Americans know within a couple people how many American soldiers and Marines, sailors and airmen have been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. People don't have a guess how many contractors. Those are still American citizens. Those are Americans who volunteered to do a job, gone overseas, have been killed for it, and there's absolutely no visibility on them.
Coming up next, when private citizens come home from war, these civilian men and women struggle with the same wounds, physical and psychological, as the military troops, but with little support and even less recognition. Retired U.S. Army Sergeant First Class Sam Walker works with at-risk teens at a youth program in Georgia.
I used to drive a Chevrolet. Now,
3.5 years ago, when he was getting ready to leave the Army after 24 years, he heard about a good-paying job.
I went to the job fair. They told me to fill out a resume. I filled out a resume, and I sent it to KBR. And about a week later, I had a phone call saying that they wanted to make me a job offer. They made me a job offer, and I accepted.
Walker went to Iraq to work for Kellogg Brown & Root, known as KBR, then still a Halliburton subsidiary, in 2003.
I went to Iraq because the money sounded good, and I wanted to, buy a house, buy a new car, and also to continue to serve my country in a certain way, by working with the soldiers.
KBR has billions of dollars worth of contracts for work all over Iraq, including construction and management of recreation centers for off-duty troops. Sam Walker was hired to coordinate activities at one of those centers.
They wanted to hire me as a MWR coordinator. An MWR coordinator was, their basic responsibility was morale, welfare, and recreation for the soldiers.
He thought the job was far from the front lines until December 21st, 2004. That day, Walker went to the KBR-run dining hall in Mosul. He was about to eat lunch with a group of contractors when a suicide bomber attacked.
There's a big flash, a big bright light, a flash of light just coming toward, and I can feel the heat. And next thing I know, when I wake up, I'm laying on the floor screaming, and there's, blood and guts and body parts all over the place.
20 Americans died, 15 of them soldiers and 5 civilians. More than 60 people were injured. It was the deadliest single incident for U.S. troops since the war began. Sam Walker had been just a few steps away from death.
Well, the clothes that I was wearing, they was burnt from the heat, from the flame. And there was a lot of copper wire that was that was in my clothes, because they were saying that, how did I get all this copper wire? I was so close to the bomber that the people that was right behind me and next to me, they was all killed, And they was wondering, I was so close to the bomber that the copper wire that was used in the detonator was stuck inside of my clothes.
Walker went home to Georgia to recover from severe head and back injuries and resigned from KBR.
I started having nightmares. I started seeing things like experiencing the bombing all over again, trying to get the smell out of my nose from smelling the blood, trying to get rid of the screams from hearing the other, the people in there screaming.
Diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, by both his own and KBR's insurance company's doctors, Walker was stunned when medical benefits were denied.
The insurance company wouldn't pay for any treatment for PTSD.
Walker hired attorney Gary Pitts, who represented soldiers with PTSD who fought in the first Gulf War.
And the military takes this stuff seriously. They brief everybody coming out of the theater on what the symptoms are. If you start having this, go get some help. And they check back up on them 3 or 4 months after they've left the war zone to see how they're doing. And the military healthcare system and the VA are all set up to take care of PTSD cases. Anyway, all the civilian contractors don't have this.
More than a year after the claim was denied, Attorney Pitts won Walker's workers' compensation case. And he continues to hear from dozens of other private contractors returning home from Iraq.
It puts the injured person, or the person with these stress symptoms coming out of the war zone that went over there and put their life at risk to support the troops. They've gone through hell. They come back here, they've got some stress problems, they can't sleep, they need to be treated, and they've got to go through this litigation system.
KBR's insurance company, AIG, would not comment on Sam Walker's case, but said that 90% of all contractors' claims have been paid without dispute. At the Department of Labor, where workers' compensation cases from overseas are handled, claims have skyrocketed from 366 before the war started in 2002 to more than 3,500 just in 2006. The numbers are evidence that civilians are in battle zones more and more often, but unlike the troops they support, contractors have far fewer resources to turn to when they come home.
As an American, you're supposed to be debriefed or something. I came home and went right to my house.
Rob Rowe was shot in the knee 6 months into his tour as a truck driver in Iraq.
I mean, we're right in the middle of it. One side is shooting at us to repel the attackers. The attackers are shooting at them, and we're right in the middle of it.
In February, Rowe met up with half a dozen other contractors home from Iraq at a VFW post in Knoxville, Tennessee, all of them looking for answers and support.
People coming home with devastating injuries caused by direct hostile action, debilitating injuries. They can't work. They're not getting no compensation to help pay bills. They're losing their homes. They're having marital problems. They're going through all kinds of psychological problems. They're lost, abandoned. Their company's not helping them.
Jana Crowder brought the group together through a website she founded in 2004 when her husband left to work as a contract engineer in Iraq.
When I first started, it was just, putting up the support ribbons. I made the support magnetic ribbons, and I started selling those on my website just to spread the word that American contractors were over there in Iraq, fighting alongside our soldiers. And from there, I've gotten here. I don't even know how to explain it. It was like a whirlwind. The phone calls started coming in, the emails started coming in. I opened up a support group.
Linked through the website, AmericanContractorsInIraq.com, the meeting in Knoxville was a chance for some to share their stories and to start to find a way to come home.
At night I dream a lot about killing. I mean, honestly, I do. And I've never been that way. I don't sleep at night no more. I take pills to sleep at night, to be honest with you. I won't take them every night, so some nights I take pills, some nights I stay awake all night.
The one thing that sticks out to mind is having a waking flashback. I was driving in my little car down the road, and all of a sudden I hear glass breaking, and I could swear that I got hit upside the head again.
You go into a war zone. There's war. People are going to die. People are going to get hurt. I encountered a greater war when I came home than the one I left behind.
They're truck drivers, they're police officers. They go over there with a livelihood. They want to use their livelihood to go over there and help the military. Well, they get over there and they get broke. They come home, they've lost their livelihood, they've lost their integrity, they've lost their families, their children. There's nothing for the families. There's nothing to teach the wives or the children how to cope with Dad. Why is Dad screaming? Why is Dad, he's sleeping on the couch, and the next minute he's on the floor dodging bullets. And the kids are just like, what's wrong with Dad? It's just not right. This is not the American way. It's just not.